country, a program calling for the conservation of more energy and the production of more coal. Any American complying with the Arab boycott against Israel would violate the law under a bill passed by the House today. The issue is still before the Senate. If you have a Honda, you may have a problem. The government warns that some 75,000 1975 and 76 Honda motorcycles have brakes that could fail on wet roads. Many states have mottos on their license plates. New Hampshire has "Live Free or Die." It violates our religious beliefs, said a New Hampshire family. Today, the Supreme Court agreed that the motto could be covered up. Some Democrats have complained about President Ford complaining about President Carter. And today, some Republicans complained about the Democrats' complaints and urged the Carter team to cease its whining and get on with the job at hand.
One tiny capsule, yet 3 separate cold medicines that can work for you up to 12 hours, all day or all night. That's the wonder of contact.
I'm Morton Dean, CBS News, New York. More news later on this CBS station.
This is CBS.
Every day, Pan Am brings people like this, closer to people like this, and places like this, closer to places like this, to bring the rest of the world a little closer to America, or America a little closer to the rest of the world.
We're America's airline to the world.
You're invited to Woody's 97th anniversary sale. And it's a savings bash. Right now, you'll save 15 to 50% throughout every Woody's store and have a grand time saving on lots of fresh spring fashions for you, your home, and your family. Store-wide quality, value, selection, and 15 to 50% savings. They're all waiting for you at Woody's 97th anniversary sale. RSVP now for big savings.
Gordon Barnes, the Weather Authority at 11.
This is a CBS News special report. From Washington, President Carter's address on energy to a joint session of Congress. Here is CBS News White House correspondent Bob Schieffer.
Good evening. The President is expected to speak for a little less than a half hour tonight. We're told he's not expecting an overwhelmingly enthusiastic reception. He rehearsed the speech late this afternoon. It took about 25 minutes, and afterward he told an aide it shouldn't take much longer than that tonight because it's such a sober speech that I probably won't get much applause. Mr. Carter will be speaking tonight in the House chamber. This is a joint session of the Congress. It's officially a joint session. Until this afternoon, it was being called a joint meeting, but both houses passed a resolution officially designating it a joint session, so that's what it is. The President's family is in the gallery tonight. The President's mother and his wife will be watching the speech. You're seeing there members of the President's cabinet who were escorted in just a minute or two ago. The session actually convened about 8:40. That's House doorkeeper James Malone.
The President of the United States.
The President, of course, will be escorted to the Speaker's roster by a group appointed from the House and the Senate. Special Escort Committee. Here's the President now. As is usual at these things, he gets a standing ovation as he comes in. Then he will take the Speaker's stand. Everyone will sit down. He will be introduced again. And then everyone will stand up and applaud again.
President, delighted to it.
House Speaker Tip O'Neill, of course, Vice President Mondale, who is the presiding officer of the Senate. And the applause goes on. His speech tonight, of course, will be to lay out the details of his energy program. Mr. Carter laid out the rationale for that program in his speech on national television Monday night. Friday, he'll hold a news conference to take questions on the plan.
Members of the Congress,
I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
That, of course, was Speaker O'Neill. This is his home turf, since this is the House chamber, so he is the one who introduces the President, rather than the Vice President, who's the presiding officer in the other chamber. White House was still polishing up the draft of this speech late this afternoon, although we're told there were no substantive changes in the last couple of days. Just a decision on what should be included and what should not. Now, here's the President.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Congress, and distinguished guests. The last time we met as a group was exactly 3 months ago today, on Inauguration Day. We've had a good beginning as partners in addressing our nation's problems. But in the months ahead, we must work together even more closely to deal with the greatest domestic challenge that our nation will face in our lifetime. We must act now, together, to devise and to implement a comprehensive national energy plan to cope with a crisis that otherwise could overwhelm us. This cannot be an inspirational speech tonight. I don't expect much applause. It's a sober and a difficult presentation. During the last 3 months, I've come to realize very clearly why a comprehensive energy policy has not already been evolved. It's been a thankless job, but it's our job. And I believe that we have a fair, well-balanced, and effective plan to present to you. It can lead to an even better life for the people of America. The heart of our energy policy is, the heart of our energy problem is, that we have too much demand for fuel. It keeps going up too quickly, while production goes down. And our primary means of solving this problem is to reduce waste and inefficiency. Oil and natural gas make up about 75% of our consumption in this country, but they only comprise about 7% of our reserves. Our demand for oil has been rising by more than 5% each year, but domestic oil supplies have been dropping more than 6%. Therefore, our imports have risen sharply, making us more and more vulnerable if supplies are interrupted. But early in the 1980s, even foreign oil will become increasingly scarce. If it were possible for world demand to continue rising during the next few years at the rate of 5% a year, we could use up all the proven reserves in the entire world by the end of the next decade. Our trade deficits are growing. We imported more than $35 billion worth of oil last year, and we will spend much more than that this year. The time has come to draw the line. We could continue to ignore this problem, as many have done in the past, but to do so would subject our people to an impending catastrophe. That's why we need a comprehensive national energy policy. Your advice has been an important influence as this plan has taken shape. Many of its proposals will be built on the legislative initiatives that you've taken into Congress in the last few years. 2 nights ago, I spoke to the American people about the principles behind our plan and our specific goals for 1985: to reduce the annual growth rate in energy consumption by more than 2%, to reduce gasoline consumption by 10%, to cut imports of foreign oil to less than 6 million barrels a day, less than half the amount that we will be importing if we do not conserve. To establish a strategic petroleum reserve supply of at least 1 billion barrels, which will meet our needs for about 10 months. To increase our coal production by more than 2/3 to over 1 billion tons a year. To insulate 90% of American homes and all new buildings. And to use solar energy in more than 2.5 million American homes. Now, I hope that the Congress will adopt these goals by joint resolution as a demonstration of our mutual commitment to achieve them. Tonight, I want to outline specific steps by which we can reach those goals. The proposals fall into these central categories. First, conservation. Second, production. Third, conversion. Fourth, development. And of course, fairness or equity, which is a primary consideration in all our proposals. We prefer to reach those goals through voluntary cooperation with a minimum of coercion. In many cases, we propose financial incentives, which will encourage people to save energy and will harness the power of our free economy to meet our needs. But I must say to you that voluntary compliance will not be enough. The problem is too large and the time is too short. In a few cases, penalties and restrictions to reduce waste are essential. Our first goal is conservation. It's the cheapest, most practical way to meet our energy needs and to reduce our growing dependence on foreign supplies of oil. With proper planning, economic growth, enhanced job opportunities, and a higher quality of life can result, even while we eliminate the waste of energy. The two areas where we waste most of our energy are transportation and our heating and cooling systems. Transportation consumes 26% of all our energy, and as much as half of that is waste. In Europe, the average automobile weighs 2,700 pounds. In our country, 4,100 pounds. Now, the Congress has already taken fuel efficiency steps and set standards which will require new automobiles to have an average efficiency or mileage per gallon of 27.5 by 1985, instead of the 18 among new cars today. The entire fleet of cars is only 14 miles per gallon at this time. To ensure that this existing congressional mandate is met, I'm proposing, first of all, a graduated excise tax on new gas guzzlers that do not meet federal mileage standards. This gas will start low and then rise each year until 1985. In 1978, for instance, a tax of $180 will be levied on a car getting only 15 miles per gallon. And for an 11 mile per gallon car, the tax will be $450. That's at the beginning. By 1985, the taxes on these wasteful new cars with the same low mileage, 15 miles per hour or 11 miles per hour, will have risen to $1,600 and $2,500. All the money collected by this tax on wasteful automobiles will be returned to consumers through rebates on automobiles that are more efficient than the mileage standards. We expect both better efficiency and also more automobile production and sales under this proposal. We will ensure that American automobile workers and their families do not bear an unfair share of the burden. And of course, we will also work with our foreign trading partners to see that they are treated fairly. Now, I want to discuss one of the most controversial and most misunderstood parts of the energy proposal, a standby tax on automobile gasoline. Gasoline consumption represents half of our total oil usage. We simply must save gasoline. And I believe that the American people can meet this challenge It's a matter of patriotism and a matter of commitment. Between now and 1980, we expect gasoline consumption to rise slightly above the present level. For the following 5 years, when we have the more efficient cars on the road, we need to reduce consumption each year to reach our targets for 1985. I propose that we commit ourselves to these fair, reasonable, and necessary goals, and at the same time write into law a gasoline tax of an additional 5 cents per gallon that will automatically take effect each year that we fail to meet our annual targets in the previous year. As an added incentive, if we miss 1 year but are back on the track the next year, then the additional tax should come off. Now, if the American people respond to this challenge, we can meet these targets. And under these circumstances, this gasoline tax will never have to be imposed. I know, and you know, that it can be done. As with other taxes, we must minimize the adverse effects on our economy. We must reward those who conserve and penalize those who waste. Therefore, any proceeds from the tax, if it is triggered by excessive consumption, should be returned to the general public in an equitable manner. I will also propose a variety of other measures to make our transportation system more efficient. One of the side effects of conserving gasoline, for instance, is that state governments who have a limited amount of tax per gallon collect less money through gasoline taxes. To reduce their hardship and to ensure adequate highway maintenance, we should compensate states for this loss through the Highway Trust Fund. The second major area where we can reduce waste is in our homes and buildings. Some buildings waste half the energy used for heating and cooling. From now on, we must make sure that new buildings are as efficient as possible and that old buildings are equipped or retrofitted with insulation and heating systems that dramatically reduce the use of fuel. The federal government should set an example. I will issue an executive order establishing strict conservation goals for both new and old federal buildings. A 45% increase in efficiency for new buildings and a 20% increase in efficiency for old buildings by 1985. We also need incentives, though, for those who own homes and businesses so that they will conserve. Those who weatherize buildings to make them more efficient would be eligible for a tax credit of 25% the first $800 invested in conservation and 15% for the next $1,400. If homeowners prefer, they may take advantage of a weatherization service, which will be required from all regulated utility companies to offer. The utilities would arrange for contractors and provide reasonable financing to the homeowners. The customer would pay for the improvements through small, regular additions to the monthly utility bills. In many instances, these additional charges would be almost entirely offset by lower energy consumption brought about by energy savings. Other proposals for conservation in homes and buildings include, first, direct federal help for low-income residents. Next, an additional 10% tax credit for business investments in conservation. Third, federal matching grants to nonprofit schools and hospitals, and public works money for weatherizing state and local government buildings. While improving efficiency in our businesses and homes, we must also make electrical home appliances more efficient. I propose legislation that would, for the first time, impose stringent efficiency standards for household appliances by 1980. We must also reform our utility rate structure. For many years, we have rewarded waste by offering the cheapest rates to the largest users. It's difficult for individual states to make such reforms because of the intense competition among states for new industry. The only fair way is to adopt a set of principles to be applied nationwide. I'm therefore proposing legislation which would require the following steps over the next 2 years. First, phasing out promotional rates and other pricing systems that make natural gas and electricity artificially cheap for high-volume users and which do not accurately reflect actual costs. Next, offering users peak load pricing techniques which set higher charges during the day when demand is great and lower charges during the day when demand is small. We also need individual meters for each apartment in new buildings instead of one master meter. Tests have shown that this will save 30% of the electrical cost in the apartment building. Plans are already being discussed for TVA, the whole system, to act as a model in implementing such new programs as I've described to conserve energy. One final step toward conservation is to encourage industries and utilities to expand what's called cogeneration projects, which capture the steam which is now wasted from electrical power production. In Germany, for instance, 29% of total energy comes from cogeneration. In this country, formerly, it was about 19%, but now it's only 4% in the United States. I propose a special 10% tax credit for investments in cogeneration. Along with conservation, our second major strategy is production and rational pricing. We can never increase our production of oil and natural gas by enough to meet our demand, but we must be sure that our pricing system is sensible, that it discourages waste and encourages exploration and new production. One of the principles of our energy policy is that the price of energy should reflect its true replacement cost as a means of bringing supply and demand into balance over the long run. Now, realistic pricing is especially important for our scarcest fuels, oil and natural gas. However, proposals for immediate and total decontrol of domestic oil and natural gas prices would be disastrous for our economy and also for working American families and would not solve the long-range problems of dwindling supplies. The price of new discovered oil will be allowed to rise over a 3-year period to the 1977 world market price, with allowances from then on for inflation. The current return to producers for previously discovered oil, that which already exists, would remain the same, except for adjustments because of inflation. Because fairness is an essential strategy of our energy policy, we do not want to give producers windfall profits beyond the incentives that they do need for exploration and production. But we are simply misleading ourselves if we do not recognize the replacement cost of energy in our pricing system. Therefore, I propose that we phase in a wellhead tax on existing supplies of domestic oil equal to the difference between the present control price of oil and the world price, and return that money collected by this tax to the consumers and the workers of America. We should also end the artificial distortions in natural gas prices in different parts of the country, which have caused people in the producing states to pay exorbitant prices while creating shortages, unemployment, and economic stagnation, particularly in the Northeast. We must not permit energy shortages to divide or balkanize our country. We want to work with the Congress to give gas producers an adequate incentive for exploration, working carefully toward deregulation of newly discovered gas as market conditions permit. I propose now that the price limit for all new gas sold anywhere in this country be set at the price of the equivalent energy value of domestic crude oil beginning next year, 1978. This proposal will apply both to new gas and to expiring interstate, intrastate, contracts. It would not affect existing contracts that presently are in effect. We must be sure that oil and natural gas are not wasted by industries that could use coal. Our third strategy will be, therefore, conversion. From scarce fuels to coal, wherever possible. Although coal now provides only 18% of our total energy needs, it makes up 90% of our energy reserves. Its production and use do create environmental difficulties, but I believe that we can cope with them through strict strip mining and clean air standards. To increase the use of coal by 400 million tons, or about 65%, we now use about 600 million tons. In industry and utilities by 1985, I propose a sliding scale tax starting in 1979 on large industrial users of oil and natural gas. Fertilizer manufacturers, crop dryers, and so forth, which must use gas, would be exempt from the tax. Utilities would not be subject to the tax until 1983 because it would simply take them longer to convert to coal. I will also submit proposals for expanded research and development in coal. We need to find better ways to mine it safely and to burn it cleanly, and to use it to produce other clean energy sources like liquefied and gasified coal. We've already spent billions of dollars on research and development on nuclear power, but very little on coal. Investments here can pay rich dividends. Even with this conversion effort, we still face a gap between the energy we need and the energy that we can produce or import. Therefore, as a last resort, we must continue to use increasing amounts of nuclear energy. We now have 63 nuclear power plants producing about 3% of our total energy. And we also have about 70 more nuclear power plants which are licensed for construction. Domestic uranium supplies can support this number of plants, judged by the most conservative estimate, for another 75 years at least. Effective conservation efforts can minimize the shift toward nuclear power. There is no need to enter the plutonium age by licensing or building a fast breeder reactor such as the proposed demonstration plant at Clinch River. We must, however, increase our capacity to produce enriched uranium fuels for light water nuclear power plants using the new centrifuge technology, which consumes only about 1/10 the energy of existing gaseous diffusion plants. We must also reform the nuclear licensing procedures. New plants should not be located near earthquake fault zones or near population centers. Safety standards should be strengthened and enforced, design standardized as much as possible. And we need more adequate storage for spent fuel supplies. However, even with the most thorough safeguards, it should not take 10 years to license a plant. It only takes 3 years. It only takes 3 years to license, design, and build a plant in a country like Japan. I propose that we establish reasonable, objective criteria for licensing, and that plants which are based on a standard design not require extensive individual design studies before the license is granted. Our fourth strategy is to develop permanent and reliable new energy sources. The most promising, of course, is solar energy, for which most of the technology is already available. Solar water heaters and solar space heaters are ready now for commercialization. All they need is some initiative to initiate the growth of a large new market in our country. Therefore, I'm proposing a gradually decreasing tax credit to run from now through 1984 for those who purchase approved solar heating equipment. Initially, it would be 40% of the first $1,000 and 25% of the next $6,400 invested to provide solar heating for a home. Increased production of geothermal energy can be ensured by providing the same tax incentives as exist for gas and oil drilling operations. Our guiding principles as we developed this plan was that above all, it must be fair. None of our people must make an unfair sacrifice. None should reap an unfair benefit. The desire for equity is reflected throughout our plan. In the wellhead tax, which encourages conservation but is returned to the public. In a dollar-for-dollar refund of the wellhead tax, as it affects home heating oil, particularly in the Northeast. In reducing the unfairness of natural gas pricing. In ensuring that homes will have the oil and natural gas they need, while industry turns toward the more abundant coal that can also suit its needs. In basing utility prices on true cost, so every user pays a fair share. In the automobile tax and rebate system, which rewards those who save our energy and penalizes those who waste it. I propose one other step to ensure proper balance in our plan. We need more accurate information about the supplies of energy and about the companies which produce energy. If we are asking sacrifices of ourselves, we need facts that we can count on. We need an independent information system that will give us reliable data about energy reserves and production, emergency capabilities, and financial data from the energy producers. I happen to believe in competition, and we don't have enough of it right now. During this time of increasing scarcity, competition among energy producers and distributors must simply be guaranteed. I recommend that individual accounting be required from energy companies for production, refining, distribution, and marketing, separately for domestic and foreign operations. Strict enforcement of the antitrust laws based on this data may prevent the need for divestiture. Profiteering through tax shelters should be prevented, and independent drillers should have the same intangible tax credits as the major corporations. The energy industry should not reap large, unearned profits. Increasing taxes, increasing prices on existing inventories of oil should not result in windfall gains, but should be captured for the people of our country. Now we must make it clear that from now on, to everyone, that our people, through their government, will now be setting the energy policy for our country. The new Department of Energy, which the Congress is already considering, should be established without delay. Continued fragmentation of government authority and responsibility of our energy program for this nation is both dangerous and unnecessary. 2 nights ago, I said that this difficult effort, which I have outlined, would be the moral equivalent of war. If successful, this effort will protect our jobs. It will protect our environment. It will protect our national independence. It will protect our standard of living. It will also protect our future. Our energy policy will be innovative, but it will be fair and predictable. It will not be easy. It will demand the best of us. Our vision, our dedication, our courage, and our sense of common purpose. This is a carefully balanced program, depending for its fairness on all its major component parts. It will be a test of our basic political strength and ability. But we've met challenges before, and our nation has been the stronger after the challenge was met. That's a responsibility that we face, you in the Congress, the members of my own administration, and all the people of our country. I'm confident that together we will succeed. Thank you very much. Good night.
So Mr. Carter has laid out the details of his energy program in a highly technical, very complex speech. To summarize quickly, if you tuned in late, he proposes a series of measures to conserve energy simply by making it more expensive, with at least some of the new taxes collected on energy returned to taxpayers in some kind of tax rebates on their income tax. Some of the key points tonight: a standby gasoline tax to go into effect in 1979 if gasoline consumption next year rises above limits set by the government. The tax to continue at a nickel a year if consumption continues to rise above the yearly prescribed level. Mr. Carter didn't say so. We're told that tax will top out at no more than 50 cents a year. Also, he proposed a series of measures, taxes mostly, to increase the price of domestic crude oil, the idea, again, being to make it more expensive to encourage less usage, bringing it up to the prices of the crude oil on the world market, something around $13.25. He also proposed some excise taxes on cars that get poor gas mileage, with rebates for consumers who buy cars that get good gas mileage. Finally, he proposed a series of tax credits and other measures to encourage better usage of the energy we now have, such things as credits for insulation in homes, things of that sort. The President's now making his way out of the House chamber. His prediction was right. He was not applauded repeatedly throughout the speech. I counted about 6 times that he was interrupted by applause, and always on fairly safe things, such things as not let the oil companies have windfall profits, and at one point when he said there should be more competition. Carter's nearing the back of the House chamber now, and will return to the White House. With me in the studio tonight for some analysis of the President's address tonight are Phil Jones, our congressional correspondent, and Nelson Benton, who has been covering the energy beat for many years. I should point out before we begin the analysis that we were all furnished advance texts of this speech. Nelson, let me just ask you first, what do you make of this policy as a whole?
The policy, I think, Bob, could be called a pretty big stick, but the stick is cushioned with a pad of gradualism. All of the tax proposals, with the exception of the crude oil tax, would sort of take a bite on the consumer a little bit later. The crude oil tax would increase the price of gasoline, of heating oil, of diesel fuel, of jet fuel fairly quickly when it goes into effect. But even that tax itself goes up gradually. The vehicle tax goes gradually. The gasoline tax, if it is indeed required, if consumption targets are not hit, it goes into effect gradually too. From a production standpoint, there is some incentive there for the producing industry. Some oil would increase in price, although a lot of the increase in the ultimate price would be taxes money that is going back into the federal till and not to the oil companies. The industry could probably take some heart in the fact that Mr. Carter said that it may not be necessary for divestiture, breaking up the oil companies or keeping them from entering other energy fields, although they want to keep a close watch on oil companies which are in or preparing to enter the coal business with the conversion to coal. But it's gradualism. It's, as described by one administration official, not an overnight karate chop.
There's some points of familiarity in it, aren't there, from some of the energy messages we've heard from previous administrations?
There are indeed. Previous administrations, since we realized most recently that we had an energy problem after Franklin D. Roosevelt back in or Harry Truman in 1952, the theme has been that the era of cheap energy is over. All 3 administrations have said this. The Carter administration is saying it as well, that energy should be priced at what it costs to replace it.
Well, Phil, what about the politics of it?
Well, we should point out that there are already some comments in. The reporters weren't the only ones who had advanced look at this. Some fact sheets that were prepared by the White House were circulating around Capitol Hill today. And even before the president made his remarks tonight, Chairman Al Ullman, who is a Democrat, head of the Ways and Means Committee that will be involved in all of the final energy legislation, or most of the major parts of it, said, quote, parts of the plan will no doubt be revised in the interest of workability and equity. Another Democrat, Don Bonker of Washington, says high gasoline prices simply won't work. But probably, I think the problem for the president, the problem for Congress, the problem for the nation was summarized by Representative Robert Bauman of Maryland, who said, asking America, the richest nation on earth, now to start acting like the poorest nation is something that's going to be very difficult to do. The Republicans are already working on their energy plan. That will be out in the next few days. No question about it, the lightning rod is the gasoline tax. And as the president told them, the Democratic people who were at the White House on Tuesday said, look, when you go out and you talk to your constituents back home, if you want to say that this is the president's energy program, why, you go right ahead and do it. That's okay with me. And I think many members sitting right out there tonight, looking ahead to the '78 election, are more than willing to do that.
Phil, thank you very much. Thank you, Nelson. One thing's for sure, this is something we're going to be hearing a lot about in the months to come. We'll hear more about it on Friday when the president has a news conference to answer questions that perhaps were not addressed fully in the address tonight. For my colleagues, this is Bob Schieffer, CBS News, saying good night.
The analysis of the presidential address has been under the sole supervision and control of CBS News. This portion has been sponsored on a continuing basis by the makers of Tegrin shampoo. This broadcast has been a CBS News special report. This is CBS.
When you're feeling friendly, hello, you've got to let it show. So offer some Wrigley Spearmint gum. There's no better way to say hello.